Welcome back to Real Family Stories. Today's story is about a woman named Doris who spent 40 years being the most reliable person in every room she walked into, until her own family decided reliable meant replaceable. I always thought if someone tried to take something from you, you'd see it coming. I didn't. Not until I found the folder. By the end of this story, you'll understand exactly how she turned their own trap into her evidence, and that part is worth waiting for. Stay with us. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd gone into the guest room to grab a sweater, and through the wall I heard my daughter-in-law Renee talking low and fast. "She left the stove on again," she was saying. "No, I know, but if we're going to move forward with this, we need 3 documented incidents." The doctor said 3. I stood very still in that hallway in my son's house in Wilmington, North Carolina, holding a sweater I didn't need, and I thought, I have never once left the stove on. I'm 69 years old. I raised 2 kids alone after my husband left. I ran the bookkeeping for a marina for 26 years, and I have never left a stove on in my life. But I didn't say anything. I folded the sweater over my arm and walked back out like I hadn't heard a word because something in me, some old instinct said, "Don't let them know what you know yet." That was 6 weeks ago. I want to tell you what happened between then and now because it's not the story I thought I was living. My son Marcus is 41. Good job, nice house near Wrightsville Beach. Married to Renee for 8 years. After my husband passed, I sold the house in Greensboro and moved down here to be closer to them and my granddaughter Ivy. Marcus set me up in a little cottage 2 streets over. I thought it was kindness. I still don't know how much of it was. The first incident, as Renee later called it in a document I wasn't meant to see, was a burnt pot of grits she said she found on my stove. I remember that morning clearly. I had made grits, eaten them, and washed the pot. I remember because Ivy had a dance recital that afternoon and I was running behind. When Renee mentioned it to me 2 days later, gently, sweetly, "Doris, honey, I think you left something on the stove." I laughed it off. I said maybe I'd forgotten to wash it well. I didn't think about it again. The second incident, she told my son, was me getting lost driving home from the grocery store. I want to be very clear about something. I did not get lost. I took the long way on purpose because it was a beautiful afternoon and I liked the water. But somehow 3 days later Marcus called to check in. And in that careful voice people use when they've already decided something about you, he asked if I'd been feeling okay lately. Any dizziness? Any confusion? That's when the hallway happened. That's when I heard the word 3. Here's what I want you to understand about being an older woman who everyone has quietly decided is starting to slip. People stop double-checking what they tell you, because they assume you won't remember it accurately anyway. That assumption is a kind of camouflage. And once I understood I was wearing it, I decided to use it. I bought a small digital recorder from a pharmacy on Oleander Drive, the kind people use for lectures, and I started carrying it in my cardigan pocket every time I went to Marcus and Renee's house. I didn't record anything I wasn't part of. I'm not proud of eavesdropping, but I am not sorry for protecting myself either. 2 weeks in, Renee asked me to babysit Ivy while she ran to the pharmacy. She was gone almost 2 hours. When she came back, she had a folder with her, the kind with a metal clasp, and she set it on the kitchen counter and went to change out of her work clothes. I wasn't trying to snoop, but my own name was written on the tab in her handwriting, and I think most people would have looked. Inside was a printed page titled Timeline of Concerns, Doris. 6 entries. 2 of them I recognized, twisted versions of the grits in the drive. 4 of them I had never heard of. A claim that I'd called Ivy by my late sister's name. A claim that I'd wandered into a neighbor's yard at night. Things that never happened, dated on days I could actually account for because I keep a small day planner out of habit from my bookkeeping years, appointments, errands, phone calls. Real ones with real times. Underneath the timeline was a printed email between Renee and a real estate agent, dated a month earlier, subject line. Cottage on Marlboro, potential listing, pending POA. Oh, power of attorney. I want to tell you I felt rage in that moment. I didn't, not yet. What I felt was the floor of my whole life quietly tilting. My son's wife was building a paper case that I was losing my mind, timed to a real estate listing for the cottage he had put me in. And Marcus, my son, who I nursed through pneumonia at 4 years old, who I put through community college working double shifts, Marcus's name was on those emails too. See seat. Silent but there. I put the folder back exactly as I'd found it. I remember my hands were steady. I remember being surprised by that. That night I called my sister-in-law, Pat, who's a paralegal in Charlotte, and I told her everything. She was quiet for a long moment and then she said something I've thought about every day since. Doris, if they're building a case against you, you'd better start building one back. And you'd better do it before they file anything with the county. So I did. Over the next 3 weeks I documented everything the real way. I kept my day planner as evidence, dates, times, witnesses, the actual mundane truth of my days. I asked my neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Louise, if she'd noticed anything unusual about me lately, and when she said absolutely not, I asked if she'd be willing to say so in writing if it ever came to that. She said of course, and then she told me something that made my stomach drop. Renee had asked her almost the same question a month earlier, except phrased the opposite way. Have you noticed Doris seeming a little off lately? Fishing. Planting. I started recording again, more carefully this time. On days I knew I'd be alone with Marcus or Renee, I didn't have to wait long. At dinner one night, Renee brought up casually that a lot of families look into these things early, before there's a real crisis, and that there were lawyers who specialized in elder planning she'd already spoken to. Marcus nodded along, eyes on his plate, the same nod I remembered from watching him agree with things as a teenager he didn't actually believe. I asked just as casually which lawyer. Renee named a firm downtown. I wrote it down in my planner that night under the day's date, the way I write down everything. Here's the part one didn't expect. 2 days later Ivy, she's 13, came by the cottage after school like she does sometimes, and while I was making her a snack she said, "Grandma, Mom's been weird lately. She keeps telling Dad you're gonna need help soon. Are you sick?" I told her no, I wasn't sick. She looked relieved and then, kids being kids, she said something that changed everything. She had this same thing happen with her mom, Grandma Sandra. Before she passed, Mom handled all of it. Renee's own mother. I hadn't known Renee's mother had passed only 2 years before we met, in circumstances Renee never talked about. That night I called Pat again and asked her to do something I probably should have thought of sooner. Pull public probate records. Took her 4 days. What she found made the whole shape of this finally click into place. Renee's mother Sandra had transferred her house into Renee's name 8 months before she died, under a power of attorney Renee had obtained after a doctor's letter citing early cognitive concerns. A doctor, it turned out, who was a family friend of Renee's and who had since lost his license for an unrelated billing issue. Renee had done this before. Successfully. To her own mother. I sat with that for a long time. Not fear anymore. Something colder and steadier. I made 3 appointments the following week and I told no one. The first was with an elder law attorney in Wilmington, a woman named Attorney Voss, who I brought everything to, the folder photo I'd taken with my phone before I put it back, my day planner, Louise's willingness to testify, the probate records from Charlotte. The second was with my own doctor, requesting a full cognitive evaluation on the record dated official clean. I passed every part of it. The third was with the new Hanover County Register of Deeds just to confirm, for my own peace of mind, that the cottage was still solely in my name. It was. For now. Attorney Voss told me something I'll never forget. The scary thing about these cases, she said, is they usually only work if the person being targeted doesn't know it's happening. The second you know, you're not a victim anymore. You're a witness against them. 3 weeks after I found that folder, I asked Marcus and Renee to come to the cottage for dinner. Just the 3 of us, I said. Ivy at a friend's house. I made pot roast, the same recipe I made every Sunday of Marcus's childhood, and I let them eat almost the whole meal before I set my phone on the table, screen up, recording app already running, and told them I wanted to talk about the folder on the kitchen counter. I watched my son's face go through about 5 different colors. Renee recovered faster. She always does. She started to say something about how it was just precautionary, how families have to think ahead, and I let her talk for almost a full minute before I asked her calmly how her mother Sandra was doing these days. The silence after that question was the loudest thing I've heard in years. I didn't yell. I didn't cry, not then. I told them what I had. The planner. Louise's statement. The cognitive evaluation dated and clean sitting with Attorney Voss. The probate file from Charlotte with Sandra's name on it. I told Marcus directly that his wife had done this successfully once already to her own mother, and that his name was on emails discussing selling my home before I had lost a single thing. I told them both that if a single piece of paperwork regarding power of attorney or my cottage appeared anywhere with either of their names on it, Attorney Voss already had a complete file ready for the county and, if necessary, for the state elder abuse investigators. Marcus didn't defend her. That was the thing that told me the most. He just put his fork down and said very quietly, "Mom, I didn't know it went that far." I believe that's true. I also believe he knew enough and chose comfort over asking harder questions, which is its own kind of choice. Renee left the table before dessert. Marcus stayed. We didn't resolve anything that night, not really. But he came back 3 days later alone and asked to see everything, really see it, not defend it. I showed him the Charlotte file. I watched something in him break open that had probably needed to for years. It's been 3 weeks since that dinner. Renee moved out of their house temporarily. Marcus's decision, not mine, though I won't pretend I wasn't relieved. There's no court case, not yet, and honestly I hope there doesn't need to be one. What there is a paper trail so complete that nobody in that family will ever again be able to quietly decide I'm someone to manage instead of someone to ask. Ivy comes by most afternoons now. Last week she asked me to teach her how to keep a planner like mine. Just in case, she said, only half joking. I told her that's exactly the right instinct to have at any age. I still make pot roast on Sundays. Marcus comes now, most weeks, and we talk about things that aren't documentation or dates or evidence. Just talk, the way we used to before anyone decided I needed watching instead of listening. I think about that hallway sometimes, that phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. I used to believe that if someone was trying to hurt you, you'd feel it plainly like a slap. I don't believe that anymore. Sometimes it sounds exactly like someone being careful with you. Sometimes it sounds like concern. The difference I've learned is in whether they ask you or decide for you. Thank you for listening to this story here on Real Family Stories. If you enjoyed it, let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next one. We'll see you in the next.